Hello and welcome to another video trying to get you the very top grades. Today we're looking at Jekyll and Hyde, as you know, and I'm going to teach you from the specimen papers, then from the two actual questions we've had in 2017, 2018, in order to see if they can give us some best bets for last minute revision before this year's exams. And then I'm going to show you how to use the mark scheme to make whatever the question is fit what you actually have revised. So in that sense, you can guess the question. It's what you've already revised and you're going to be able to fit it to whatever the examiners ask you. And I'll show you how to do that at the top of, 30 out of 30. And I'll also show you some techniques which guarantee you a grade 5. So let's look at the rather unimaginative choices of questions that we've had so far. So AQA has released some specimen papers, and we have Mystery and Fear, which was created through setting. Now look what happened last year. That question became Mystery and Tension. In other words, that's pretty much the same question. Now that's a good clue that the examiners are going to use the previous specimen papers to give us this year's question. Well, if we go back to 2017, they asked for sympathy for Jekyll. In the specimen paper, there was a question on Jekyll's science, which is really just another way of writing about Dr. Jekyll. So we can see there's a really strong hint that two of the specimen paper questions have already come up. So I would put a lot of my revision into Hyde. Now remember, this is just if it's last minute. Obviously, I want you to revise the whole novel. But if you're thinking tactically, where am I going to put a few extra bits of my revision, then revising Hyde is going to be super useful. And it could be how Hyde is evil. It could be about how he is dangerous. But that's the same question as how he's a frightening outsider. These are just different words to talk about the same thing, which is basically Edward Hyde. Now there is an outside possibility that you'll get a question on Utterson, and I will put a link to what I think, pardon me being immodest, is a really brilliant video in getting you grade 9 on Utterson. I'll put the link up there, but in this video we're going to assume that the question might be Hyde. Right, let me come up to this section of the mark scheme. I'm just going to enlarge it. And there are two things which are going to give you the top grade. The first thing is that you're going to explore through a well-structured argument. That means you have to plan a point of view. Well, that means you have to know what Stevenson's point of view was, why he's writing this novel, how he wants to influence his readers, not just how he wants them to feel, but how he wants them to change in their thinking. That will give you a well-structured argument. Exploratory means you've got more than one interpretation, and that's made clear down here. The examiners want you to have a convincing exploration of interpretations, okay, or the author's ideas or perspectives. So basically, you've got to have more than one interpretation to write about and say why one interpretation is better than the other in your well-structured argument. Now, let's go back and look at the questions and see the massive problem that the examiners keep giving us. This is the massive problem. I don't have to give any different interpretations with writing about the sympathy for Jekyll, and I don't have to give any different interpretations when I talk about the novel being about mystery and tension. Now that's a massive problem. It means the question doesn't invite me to do the things that are in the mark scheme. Now I can get round that by saying, well, I feel a bit sympathetic towards Jekyll or Hyde, but also a bit unsympathetic because, so that will give me a way into more than one interpretation. But it's a bit clunky because none of those consider Stevenson's ideas. So what I want to write about to get those top marks are Stevenson's ideas, and I have to bring those in no matter what the question is. So I hope you appreciate that even if I'm right and the question is about Hyde, knowing that is not necessarily going to get you the top grades. knowing why Stevenson has created Hyde and how he wants the readers to change their thinking about something in society as a result of finding out about Hyde, that will get you the top grades. And in the next video I make, I will write you a guide to Stevenson's ideas, both at grades 4 and 5 and at grades 7, 8 and 9, so you can see the difference. So tune in for that extra video. But for now, let's look at what matters at grade 4 and 5 with our question prediction about Hyde or Stevenson's idea. So grade 5 last year started at 50% of the marks, which is described by having everything in this paragraph. So here you have to be explanatory in parts. So you don't have to be able to discuss Stevenson's ideas here. You just have to be able to explain how he presents the character. Okay, so the question fits that. In other words, the question is designed to help me get grade 5 reasonably easily. I do, however, have to write about the author's methods, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. And then the other thing I have to do is have an explanation of relevant contextual factors. So I have to explain the context that's going on in Victorian England, but I have to make sure they're relevant. How do I do that? How do I make sure I'm not just chucking in some context and not making it relevant to the question? Well, if we go to the top of the mark scheme and see what the examiners tell us about context, we get the answer. Because they want a convincing exploration of the context which are linked to the interpretations. So now we know what context will be relevant. It's the bits of context that help you interpret why Stevenson has presented Hyde, or whoever it is, in this particular way. Okay, well, that means I can predict whatever the question is, it will always be about context. I've always got to bring in some context to explain the writer's point of view. It will also always be about methods. Can I predict what those methods are? Yes, I can. Methods with Jekyll and Hyde will always mean these three things. I mean, it can mean a lot more, but if you just remember these three things, it's easy for you to get at least a grade 5. So his first method that he uses all the way through is that one thing or one character always symbolizes something else. So Jekyll symbolizes middle-class men and their hypocrisy with their secret hidden desires. Hyde symbolizes those secret and hidden desires, and he symbolizes the idea of pure evil. Jekyll and Hyde symbolize the dual nature of man. Even Jekyll's house symbolizes the dual nature of man, because we've got the front contrasting so dramatically with the back. The front we associate with Jekyll, the back we associate with Hyde. The addresses of the two men also symbolize the duality of man. Jekyll lives in Leicester Square, which is right next door to this sinful area, Soho, which is where Hyde lives. The other method that he uses is to explore the idea of Christian morality. And so Jekyll is continually trying to put right the wrongs that Hyde does and behave in a Christian way, whereas Hyde completely rejects any idea of Christian morality and just indulges in any of his evil desires. Now, how am I going to make sure that the examiner knows I'm writing about methods? I'm going to write this. Stevenson uses the following method. Yep. That'll introduce it like that. So then I will have using Hyde to symbolize blah blah blah. Okay, don't put the Z in because that's American. And so when the examiner is thinking, has my student written about method, they don't have to think, it's there right in front of them. You've used that word and you said, give me my 5, come on, and then let's see if I can get a higher grade than that. And at the top of the mark scheme, you can do exactly the same. You can use the word interpretation in your essay. One interpretation of Jekyll's behavior is blah, blah, blah. Another interpretation of that same behavior might be this, blah, de, blah, de, blah. And you've used the word twice to explain that you're presenting different interpretations. In conclusion, when you get your well-structured argument, I mostly feel that this interpretation has more value because blah, blah, blah. Yeah? Or when you're writing about the context, Stevenson's perspective on Hyde's behaviour might be blah-de-blah-de-blah. So if you use these words in your essay, it tells the examiner you're doing the skills at the top of the mark scheme, which says to the examiner, give me the top marks. So I hope you can see how the mark scheme helps you plan what the question's going to be, no matter what the wording. Remember, the wording in the question won't necessarily ask you to give interesting interpretations, which will invite you to get no better than a grade 4 or 5. So make sure you put those interpretations in. Those interpretations come from what you think Stevenson's ideas are. My top bet for the exam is probably going to be Hyde, but it could be Utterson, and look out for my link to the Utterson video up here. Hope you found that super useful. See you soon on my channel.